I don't know why I didn't see this before. It just came to me. It's so simple. The reason why parallel capacitance, when placed either inside an inductor or outside, immediately adjacent to it, but in parallel, just like would be in parallel within the inductor. The reason why it works so well in creating the reversal of current, namely it turns the inductor into a generator, without the inductor having to move or rotate through a magnetic field and obey Michael Faraday's law of induction in order to become a generator, is because a capacitor, if you have sufficient capacitance relative to the size of the inductance for that coil, if the capacitance is large enough and in parallel with it, with very little resistance inside that capacitor, then what happens is you get an immediate response at both terminals of the inductor, because the capacitor is hooked up in parallel to the two terminals of the inductor, not in series but in parallel. So when you get sufficient capacitance, not only do you get a simultaneity of electrostatic response at both terminals simultaneously, but you get an adequate response. In other words, you get a storage. You know, the coil is storing too, but it's storing magnetic potential. Meanwhile, you get the capacitor storing dielectric potential, and if it's storing the right amount relative to whatever amount the inductor is qualified to store based on its inductivity, the size of its henries, now you've got a match. And you've got a match in time as well as in quantity. So everything aligns itself. And then you get one other factor that has to be considered, and that is the fact that the coil has to be in a situation of mutual inductivity with another coil, which also has adequate parallel capacitance either inside of it or immediately adjacent to it, with the same properties as the first coil. So you get this parametric, did I say that right? Yeah, parametric interaction between the two inductivities that also are making use of parallel capacitances. And you've literally got a phenomenon in which you've got everything you need to create free energy. Why do we know this? Well, because Eric Dollard told us so. And he didn't just come up with this idea on his own. I actually, a few years after I first read his statement that he learned about network analog, analogs of transmission lines, network analogs, when he was in high school, when he was 16, he read L. V. Bewley. L as in Larry, V as in Victorious, Bewley, B-E-W-L-E-Y. And I looked it up on the internet, and he wrote a paper, and he wrote a book, at the very least. So a short synopsis, and then a longer treatise. And it was way over my head, I have to admit it. Come on. I mean, this is electrical engineer stuff, but the schematics were not. The schematics were very straightforward and easy for a layperson like myself to comprehend some of them. All I had to do was use the mentality that my mother inculcated into me, and that is the mind of an artist. You look at something visually, as an archetype. And what can you do with it? The simplest thing you can do with art, with symbolic geometric arrangements, is you do the exercise when you're a little child in elementary school. You do a finger painting or something, or it's like a Rorschach's test or whatever, an ink blot. You do an ink blot kind of art in which you fold the paper down, at least at one fold, and squish it so the paint squishes all over the place, and it forms an interesting pattern. Well, when I look at my circuits that are intended to create, or I should say amplify, a marginal input of energy that then self-oscillates and engineers its own frequency response over time to accommodate the change in amplitude of reactive power that's building up inside there. God, I lost my train of thought. That's such a long sentence. Oh no. Well, yeah, so I did this to his schematics, L.V. Bewley schematics, and I realized where Eric Dollard got his analog computer in LMD mode from in the first place. By taking Bewley's schematics of a transmission line network and folding it using the ground neutral plane as the midline of a spine, like the vertebrae of the spinal column of a vertebrate animal. And then making a carbon copy but reverse image over onto the other side of that midline position. And then I saw, voila, there it is. But I saw a variation that Eric Dollard did not share with us. And he did admit, when I first read what he was describing, he said, well, there are some networks that I will never admit, some that I'll come out with later, and he did, and some I'll never admit to. And I can see why, because some are probably very powerful. Well, what I got out of going direct to the source of Eric Dollard's inspiration, L.V. Bewley himself, I found I could get a derivative that was slightly different and actually more efficient, and I call it the Bewley archetype, because it does reference Bewley and not Eric, but it's very similar. The difference is, instead of two capacitors interspersed by two inductors to make one module of either an LMD or a TEM, depending on how you connect the modules together with other modules, instead you have a ring of four capacitors, and two of them, just pick two, opposing each other, also have two inductors in parallel with those two capacitors. And what I found was the extra pair of capacitors helps initiate the surge of a reactive response to a small input of energy coming in from the outside. It really helps. But once it's engaged, you don't need those extra two capacitors anymore. You can do without them, and it'll keep building up. So you only need it to get it kick-started. And then Eric Dollard's version, his LMD module, his analog computer in LMD mode, is adequate to keep it going, the surge going, as it's amplifying, and accumulating more reactance, more reactive power over time. So I thought this was very instructive. Now, where was I coming from to get to L.V. Bewley? Boy, I've lost my train of thought. It's late in the day. I'm not able to focus. I hold on to these. I have perfect memory. Let's see. I forgot what the point of this video was, or this audio recording was for. Oh dear. Yeah, I completely forgot. I'm so busy yapping. Well, anyway, I hope you get something out of this, because I already lost my train of thought. I think I probably already stated it, and I'm just elaborating and going off on various tangents, so I think if you don't get the message by now, God help us all. No. No, you will. It just takes time to sink in through our thick coconut, because it's a different way of thinking. I liken our conventional wisdom to you're lying on the floor and a fat person is sitting on your chest, and so all you can do is exhale. You cannot inhale. You cannot take a breath. You'll die of asphyxiation, and you'll be replaced by somebody else. And that's literally we are. We are a disposable culture, engineered or designed on purpose to throw away, to use something and then just throw it away. Kind of like our spouses, Anyway, well, I better not go there. But our batteries, we're lucky we get to recharge some, but a lot of them are not. They're sold, the most popular battery in the supermarket is disposable batteries. Use them once, toss them in the trash. So we're geared that way. And that's the way our circuits are designed. They're meant to exhale. They're meant to spend energy. They're not meant to do the obverse, or the inverse, I should say. But when you think about it, DC electricity is only one half of the story. It's one half of an oscillating cycle. We discharge the battery. Then we go and recharge it, which is the reverse cycle. Or we go and manufacture a new one, which again is the reverse cycle or the inverse of the discharge of the battery, is its manufacture. So, we're not really looking at the whole picture. And how can you inhale if you've got a fat person, or a big boulder, if you prefer, sitting on your chest? You can't. And that boulder is giving our circuits the full quota of voltage that we have worked out in our calculations that circuit's going to need in order to run. properly. That's the wrong amount of voltage. If we want free energy, we're doing it all wrong. So this is, you really got to think differently. You can't, you've got to have enough faith, you know? You want to kick your kid out of the home. Well, you don't give him enough money to live on the rest of his life unless you can and you're loving and you love your son or your daughter. But if you don't have a lot of money to give, or you just don't want to be that nice, you give him just enough. My stepfather wanted to kick me out of the house on a month's supply of money. Enough to, put me in an apartment for 1 month, and then you're on your own. Well, I didn't appreciate his attitude, but here I've finally come around full circle, and I can say, you know what, stepdad? I can honestly, finally agree with you. Because when it comes to free energy, that's exactly what we have to do. We have to give it no more than what's readily available in our environment, which is not a whole lot to speak of. And yet we have to have enough faith in ourselves to think to ourselves, you know what, I may not know now, but eventually I'll know how to make this happen. I can make it happen in a simulator, but only because I've trained myself over a period of over 4 years. I have yet to learn how to do the same thing in the real world. And I get criticized for that, and that's a valid criticism as far as it goes, because it's not a completely valid criticism. I can do it in the virtual reality of a simulator. That I can do. So at least I get some kudos for having accomplished some kind of skillfulness that apparently is lacking with most other people who deal with electrical engineering. They don't go there, and I don't think it's because for lack of skill. It is a lack of experience, that's true, because they're told not to go there. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. But in theory, I'm pretty sure all electrical engineers are taught this stuff because they're taught to recognize it, to know it when they see it and suppress it for the safety of their equipment and for the safety of their paycheck. On both counts. And for the stability of our society as we know it. 3 counts. So I know they know it when they see it, but they don't do what I do and encourage it. And try to learn, even more difficult than the encouragement, is to regulate it. And of course, also similarly difficulty to regulation is to be practical in how you go about building it. You don't want to build something that's going to cost you a fortune. You want it to be readily available, off-the-shelf parts, ideally. You don't want to have to customize anything. You don't want to have to make something as big as a house. You probably want to fit it in your back pocket without bulging extravagantly out of your butt. You want all those particulars to make it convenient and user-friendly, and that's a challenge. But the first challenge that I've already gotten past, most people they don't want to go there. They don't even want to develop the ability to theoretically do it in the context of the safe environment of a simulator. It doesn't cost anything, you won't get electrocuted every time it blows up, and you'll be able to develop a modicum of skill. Not enough skill to get by in the real world, obviously, but a modicum of skill to at least get started. Your first baby step. And training takes time. There are no books on the subject. You can't take any college courses on this. You're on your own if you want to do it, and so it's harder. And who wants to do that? If it's not going to pay well, if it's going to ruin the economy, who wants to go there? Well, I go there because my mind is already in the future. I was born this way. I can't help it. It's just the way I am. I'm not interested in fitting in. I'm not interested in maintaining the status quo. You could call me a domestic terrorist if you like, or a con artist if you prefer. It doesn't matter, because both are applicable from the standpoint of common sense. But I don't believe in a democratic science. I think that is a sham. In fact, I think it's ridiculous to vote on what's the truth, because that's a fallacy of logic along with appeal to authority and appeal to emotion is appeal to common sense. There are 3 fallacies of logic out of the 5 major fallacies of logic that are the most popular in our Western culture, which is pretty pervasive. Even the East is starting to absorb our Western ways. Anyway, I think I've said enough.